to the Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and good friend Dion. How's it going, Dion?
Life is great.
Right, and we're back for part 5 of our Epicurean deep dive into Lucifer. And this is a special episode because we're going to be looking at haute cuisine, examining sort of the more culinary aspect of the mystery, and we're going to be bringing on a special guest, our good friend Mandy. So before we dive in, though, let's give our couple warnings. Number one, Dion and I are just a couple of friends out here exploring these interesting occult ideas. Everything expressed here are our opinions. Take them with a grain of salt. Use your own reason, make up your own mind. And also, trigger warning, we're talking about murder, we're talking about sex, we're talking about violence, we're talking Lucifer. So if any of that is going to offend you, just be warned that we're going to be getting into some weird creepiness. With all that being said, Dion, why don't you talk about where we've come from and where we're going today in terms of this Foole and in terms of the haute cuisine in Lucifer?
Wow. So the past couple episodes, we've talked about a romanticized version of Lucifer, the mystery rites, how they were suppressed through the church, and then later on reintroduced through the Renaissance into Elizabethan, Victorian eras, through cults, theater, the fine arts, even to the culinary arts, up to modern movies today, and how some of these modern, say, horror movies or art house movies incorporate some of these mystery rites as well. And so that's what we've been seeing over the past couple episodes. You might get some old vintage movies along with vintage texts, old cookbooks, Luciferian cults. You know, it all ties together in the end.
Right. And this connective idea of the freedom and the pursuit of artistry and beauty and that creative muse. This seems to be, that's why we're approaching this from that Epicurean lens. We're looking at the Luciferian cult, but the aspect of it that was into high poetry, stories, song, high culture, and this experience of the pleasure. You know, do you want to live deliciously, Dion?
That's right. That's right.
So where are we going today?
We're going to get into some Edgar Allan Poe, also some culinary dishes that relate to the mystery rites, how that's encoded into the dishes and itself, psychoactives, along with some biblical stuff, Greek stuff, and some of these movies as well, some European movies. So, yeah, let's hit the first pick.
All right, here we go.
Edgar Allan Poe. Start with cryptology. A lot of people don't know he was into cryptology, ciphers, puzzles, codes, so much so that he even issued challenges in the local newspapers of his time in the 1800s. And some of those puzzles weren't even solved until recently in the 2000s.
That's so wild. I love that. Yeah. Edgar Allan Poe is such an incredible magical character, you know. He's also deeply into the occult and magic and Hellenism. He could read and write Greek, and he was deeply knowledgeable of the ancient mysteries and incorporated so much of the magic and mystery into all of his works.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, he issued challenges in newspapers that he could solve any cipher, and people would send him ciphers and he would solve them. No one could win. He in his novels, that's what people don't understand. And his stories can contain hidden codes and ciphers. He's just straight up telling people they're just too stupid to get it. They just think they're horror stories. One is called The Golden Bug, which deals with the scarab and his servant. And it's kind of racist, though. I got to tell you in this story. But his servant's name is Jupiter, Jove, which has allusions to this planetary stuff we've been talking about in the past episodes. And they're trying to find Captain Kidd's treasure through a cipher. And remember, we talked about Captain Kidd's treasure. The Mormon, Joseph Smith, was trying to find it, too. And all of them were looking at Venus and Jupiter to try to navigate by.
We were using this Jupiterian magic as well as this Venus and Mars, all this planetary stuff. Remember, Joseph Smith's dad had that dagger inscribed to Mars on it, right? And then they were using the planet Jupiter when they were scrying. Yeah, this wild stuff.
So people don't know, but Edgar Allan Poe encoded this. He straight up told them. So this story, the Cask of Amontillado, it takes place during Carnival. And it's a Luciferian story in that it deals with gluttony and revenge, excess, because you could see the cover, what Carnival is, if people know it. We'll get into that in later episodes, but hit the next pick.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories for Poe. And I also just want to set some of the stage for its writing so people understand some of the context in which the story came out. So a lot of people believe that Poe actually wrote it as an attack on his critics, and specifically on one critic named Thomas, I believe it was Thomas Hood, who had written a satirical version of him in one of his own mystery books called 1844. And Poe really hated this. And and if you really get into this, into the story of the Cask of Amontillado, it is this act of revenge, and it is this magical playing of words and creating of a story and cycles through time. Anyway, go into it, Dion, because I have so much to say about the story as we go.
That's good. We'll unpack it as we go. And it deals with the Fool. The concept of the Fool. You saw the Carnival, and like you've seen the cover of our thumbnail and the cover of the story there. His friend is dressed up as a fool, and this deals with some basic revenge stuff. And the way the story is, he tells him, "Hey, I got some Amontillado, and I have some down in the cellar, and I need someone to verify it because you're a wine expert." He tells, what is it, Fortunato, who's his name?
Yep.
And Fortunato and Fortunato. And at first, the guy doesn't want to do it. He's a little drunk. It's during Carnival. Why am I to leave the celebration and go in the cellar for some wine, even though this is a special wine, because we'll get into it. But he tells him, well, hey, I'm going to go to Lucchesi then, and I'll have Lucchesi go down and verify it. Now, at the thought of that, he goes, no, I'll go. Because Lucchesi is the competition, the other wine guy, the gourmand. Now, the name Lucchesi is Lucifer. Just so you know, that's where the name comes from Lucas, Lucchesi, Lucius. Yeah, so it's Lucifer. He goes, well, if you don't want it, I'm going to go to Lucifer. So at that, he goes, no, I'll go. So they go down into the dungeon, let's say, catacombs, the wine cellar. And at this point, I'll talk about Amontillado, the special type of wine, because it starts as a wine that you put yeast on, and then it's fermented into a brandy, and it's done a special way through what's called the Solaris system. And the one we're talking about is the 9-stage system, 9 years and 9 casks. If you go to the next picture, right there, the one on the right, see how it's 9 barrels? And your freshness is at the top. So you would draw from the bottom, and then you would fill from the middle, and then you would fill the top ones down to the middle, then add more to the top. And you keep doing that in a course of stages for 9 years and 9 casks. And you get this special drink that's starting off as wine that's turned into a special sherry. Did I say brandy? It's sherry. And so it's a connoisseur drink at that. And so that's why you wanted to go down there and check it out. And so imagine they go down into the catacombs. So is there anything you want to say at this point?
Well, I just want to set it up because there's so much about tension around the story and what's going on. And the mystery that is unfolding in this particular story, the question we need to ask is, why does Montresor go after Fortunato? And why does he destroy him? And there's a couple allusions to this. Montresor seems to be old wealth, he has catacombs, he has family, he has lineage that has been hurt. There's all these allusions that Montresor makes to him being a snake who's been accidentally stepped on. That's invoking a very specific magical image that you'll see of the foot crushing the snake.
That's
right?
his family's crest. That's the Montresor family crest at that.
Exactly.
And so the word Montresor has a code, a cipher in there that's based off the number 9. If you divide up it said 3 letters, Montresor, it means my 3 sisters.
Beautiful. Wow. I didn't know that. That's so
and you
cool.
can take it and divide it up into other ways, and it has other meanings in there, dealing with fate, dealing with opening doors, dealing with a lot of things. I wasn't going to bring it all up, but since you're going deep with it, with his family's name, because it's a cipher that Poe put into it.
Yeah, and there's so much going on with this too, because like it seems to be, from my reading of the story, the way I perceive things is that Fortunato represents new money. He's trade. He's trying to get prestige, and his grand issue is his pride. He's prideful. It's not he must have accidentally harmed Montresor and not even realized it. Taken family business. It was never intentional, but now you stepped on the snake, and now the snake, Montresor, is coming to destroy you for your ignorance. Right? And there's so much that's going on about this too. It's that he manipulates the fool, and he's casting him as a fool, and he's dressing him, because we have to remember too that this story is a retelling that's told 50 years later by Montresor. So we don't even know how accurate it is, but so him even dressing him up as a fool could be false. And so everything in the story we have to understand is about projecting an image of power. And the only one who can even verify that any of it happened is Montresor himself, because if it's all true, the guy got buried alive in the tomb, right?
Right. And he's only telling the story out of guilt later on in life.
Exactly.
Our pride, because it's about pride.
Exactly.
So, we'll
admitting what
the
you
story.
did, that hubris, that pride. And also there's all of this weird symbolism with going down into the caverns, right? And Fortunato thinks he's a Mason, right? Because he casts Masonic signs at Montresor, and Montresor, I think, willfully ignores them and talks about being a Mason, kind of like this joke, right? Again, it's always this magic about the play on words, because he's going to bury him alive like a Mason. Well, he thinks he's protected because they're both Masonic brothers, So, it
deals with the trowel, a Masonic trowel, and see it in the fool's mind. He thinks, "Oh, that's a symbol of a Mason." But to Montresor, that's the tool he's going to cook them, or it's a cooking tool. Remember, this is the cooking show. If you all forgot, we're in a culinary series. So what happens next, he takes him down somewhere, dresses him as the fool, handcuffs him to something, and backs off real quick. Whoa! And the guy goes, "What are you doing?" And he starts to brick him up and layer him up in a coffin. With the bricks, and they have a conversation. Why'd you do this? Blah, 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 back and forth. And so I don't want to get too much into the emotional part of it, or the reason why. I want to get into the methodology and the symbology behind that, in terms of what he's doing is he's creating a coffin, which is a pastry shell we've talked about before in previous episodes. And so he's taking the fool and putting him into a coffin. And like in previous episode, we talked about the coffin. You don't eat the shell in original pies and pastry dishes. You would preserve a meat inside of it, and then later on you would open it up and get the meat out. It wasn't until years later you started eating the shell itself. That's as in a pie that we eat today. But before that was just the crust. Yeah. And the word crust becomes custard. Crustard becomes custard. It's a baked shell, let's say. And we're going to get more into the fool. And so is there anything else you want to close with this Cask story before we move on?
So he's going down, right? It's a fool who's going down into the depths, right? Through various levels where he's being manipulated and lied to, where he's eventually locked and cast into the underworld. So I think that there's an allusion here to this underworld journey, going and coming back. But Fortunato doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't know the passcodes, doesn't know the secrets. He thinks he knows the signs, but he only knows the Masonic signs. And this is why he gets buried alive, for his ignorance that he was ever even involved in any of this journey, any of this magic. And part of the reason we see this is through number symbolism. 11 is the crypt that he's buried alive in. Okay, this is very powerful number. If we look at the tarot, 11 in the trump is justice. So one, this is Montresor enacting his justice upon Fortunato for his ignorance. But it's also 11, if you add it together, 1 and 1 is 2, that becomes the magician. The magician is the one who casts the magic, right? And it's about Foole, right? Here's the thing, it's that what I'm seeing here is that there was an inability for Fortunato to grow beyond the Foole to become the magician, right? He didn't learn the secret signs. He didn't learn to see and to recognize the snake in the grass, right? And so he gets killed for his hubris and is buried alive. He was ignorant of all the magic all around him. This was all a test.
Yep, the Foole is ignorant. So
Yep.
we're going to get into the Foole next. A different type of a Foole. A fruit Foole, which is a term from a culinary term going back to the Middle Ages. Well, yeah, right here. Here's an example before we go to that, is a pastry coffin. An example of what happened to the Foole in that story. In Poe's story, he's imprisoned into a pastry shell, into a coffin, to be consumed later as some kind of ritual sacrifice by Montresor, because he was afraid Lucchesi or Lucifer was going to take his place, Fortunato. Yeah. And so go to the next pick. All right, so before we go to that, before we get into the concept of the Foole, which is whipped cream with fruit. If you were to Google it right now, it's going to say a fruit Foole is whipped cream with fruit folded into it. So we're going to explore the concept today of milk, the lactgnosis, with some type of fruits, psychoactives, blended in ritual forms to be consumed in the mystery rite. This is all about the mystery rite told through culinary dishes, starting with the Foole. In other words, the Foole is the parfait. You've heard of a parfait, which means perfect, which is yogurt with fruit on it. It's the simple thing, this combination, these elements, this yogurt, that lacto with the fruit on top of it, the citrus. And
all of these are magical terms to perfect, to the Foole, right? And it's all in this culinary stuff.
Well, even the next term right here, panna cotta. Because a panna cotta is like the same thing. You might see it. It's the cream thing with the fruit on it. But where it comes from, it's all esoteric. First, the pano, from pano, because that means cream covers milk like cloth on top, from the Latin patina, because the cream forms a patina on the surface of the milk. And cotta, which is a short garment resembling a surplice, not a supplice we talked about before, but a surplice worn by Catholic priests. If you hit the next pick, right there. So what he's holding is a panna cotta. It's the Foole. It's the parfait. It's custard with fruit on it. The dress is called a cotta. You see the dress that he's wearing right there with the lace on it? That's a cotta. And the panna is the cream or patina that forms on top of milk. So he's wearing a panna cotta. That's the dish right there that he's actually wearing. It has a symbolic form. This is getting to some real esoteric stuff. I didn't know it with these Foole dishes and desserts. So next we're going to talk about, all right, go to the next pick. Boom. So you could see the Foole right there in a dish. And you see the Foole in the tarot card right there. And what a basic Foole, if you were to type it in Google, it's going to say it's a fruit sauce folded into whipped cream custard, sometimes with or without custard. So fruit sauce folded into whipped cream. I'll unpack just all those words right there in a mystery rite and psychoactive in take you through the Dionysic or Eleusinian rites, depending which way you want to go. First, let's go to and so before we go, the panna cotta, a lot of times was finished off with the fruit brandy or sherry.
In
It has
Amontillado.
the curse in it. Yeah, the panna cotta as well, because that's what the priest wanted, huh? So go to the next pick. So if we're going to start with our first ingredient today, if we're in the kitchen, our first ingredient is milk from Gala, the Greek name for the Milky Way, the galaxy.
Galaxias.
Yeah, it's that Milky Way. We want to churn it. We want to take some of this magic milk and do something with it. That's our backbone of the dish today.
It's important, too. We recognize that this is an epithet of the great mother, Galaxias, right? Cybele is often described as the Milky Way. Or Rhea, right? The flow of Rhea is the flow of her milk. You also get we've talked about the great goat, Alamatea, who's in the Milky Way. And Zeus goes to get the milk from Alamatea in order to learn how to control the lightning. So this is a very occulted magical phrase. And for those who are interested in more modern, interesting kind of dragon artist type things, Galaxia is the name of the great goddess that Asimov creates at the end of his series Foundation. So what he has is the robot Danilov genetically modify humanity over millions of years to the point where all of life in the Milky Way becomes an interconnected symbiotic being known as Galaxia. But they also maintain their individuality. So I just love this word and this imagery of this great universal goddess as the stars and the unflowing of milk. It's beautiful.
When you said that Danilov, that brought back my childhood. I remember reading that as a kid, but I thought it was iRobot. I don't even know if that was the same story. Is that a different book? I got all my wires crossed.
So the thing with Asimov is most of his books kind of coalesce, right? And Danilov is in iRobot, but makes an appearance at the end of Foundation as well. Yeah. Which
ends up being that Will Smith movie, so you all know. All right, so let's get back to the aqua vitae, the Milky Way. Go to the next pick. Hercules. Heracles. Remember with Zeus? And then the story is that Hermes takes him up there to get fed because Zeus always wants to kill his kids. And part of the milk splattering, we talked about the lactgnosis, how we left off in the last episode. If only Bernard was there, they would have collected it and we wouldn't have the Milky Way. Because in this myth, she's feeding the baby Heracles that Hermes brought, and the spray creates the Milky Way. And it's through this churning that we're gonna make our cream, because it's our whipped cream. And we've already been talking about whipping in the past couple episodes, and the cream that we need to create through the gall the milk, which is the lactgnosis. And it could be a special milk at that. We've talked about spiced milks, we could have fed the goat poppies, ergotized rye, all kinds of things, cannabis, if you want that milk to be spicy. So just saying, if you're making your ingredient. And so another thing, if you were to churn the milk and let it sit overnight, you get that yogurt we've been talking about. Our kumis, we talked about kumis, which is fermented milks that become alcoholic, estrogenic, the mare's milk, the ones from the Scythians, are the Persian milks and cheeses that are psychoactive, which we're kind of talking about today.
Or we can look at it from the Indian tradition. You have one of the most important myths is the churning of the ocean of milk, right? Where they create the Amrit, where the gods and the devas come to, or the devas and the asuras come together. And then they take the giant mountain in the world's sake of Vasuki, and they use it to actually produce the butter, the cream, right? Which is that Amrit that gives you that eternal light. So yeah, this is like a very powerful image, this making and separating of the cream and using that as this psychoactive, because also remember in the churning of the ocean of the milk, they're all adding ingredients to it. The moon gets dropped down into it. Famously, Shiva has to take the poison from Vasuki, and he uses his body to transmute the poison. It causes his neck to turn blue. And then the poison is brought back in to the milk. And in some versions, it's through the copulation with the goddess Parvati that the milk is transformed, that the poison is transformed into something that can be added to the milk. So yeah, wild stuff.
And part of the blue neck is the staining of the blue mushroom. They talk about as Shiva being a mushroom that's thrown into the bong lassi, because this is what this is. We're talking about a bong, a churned milk. And you said amarique, which is ambrosia. In modern times, if I were to go to a restaurant and order ambrosia, they'd bring me whipped cream with a bunch of fruit tossed into it. That's what we're talking about. This is all the same dish we're talking about. This magical dish here. So
I forgot about ambrosia. My grandma's 70s cookbooks are coming back to haunt me.
All right, so next pick, please.
Oh, wow.
So if we wanted to do the custard, because it doesn't always have custard. Because if I want to add custard, I got to add the ovum, Phanes, the egg.
Yeah,
which is hermaphroditic. When you add the egg, it has no gender yet. When it's added into our cream, you have to cook it though. It has to be passed through the fire. So you have to pass Phane through the fires to make it renderable for this dish. And then we'll add it to that gala, to the milk. And then, like I said, the milk could have been fermented overnight to make it a yogurt form. And then our next action is very important, what we would do to it. Go to the next pick. All right. Kaikion. In the word, that means to stir. So we've been talking about whipping and stirring in our different past episodes. You know, this is all building up. It all makes sense. With the whip and creating something, the function is stirring. That we're building a type of a kaikion dessert. Are
we the dessert, Dion? Are we whipping ourselves and churning ourselves up in the butter? Do we need to separate the cream?
yeah, the solids. And it's a process. So, and this is an ancient ritual. Besides just being an Eleusinian kaikion ritual, go to the next pick. That right there is a priest, and those are called the barsum sticks for the Homa ritual.
Ancient Iran, right? Persia.
Yeah, and those are ephedra sticks. It's a whip or a whisk. So you can whip people or you can whip up a cream. And remember, what are they drinking in the Homa ritual? It's a drink. It's something that's dessert that's mixed of something. And so go to the next pick.
Yeah, and ephedra makes sense because it is a drink, you know, in the early Vedas, like Indra, when he drinks the soma, it actually causes him to become like strong and powerful and able to go out and fight. It's like an energizing drink. And in a lot of the Heoma texts, it's a similar kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Boom. So look at that. It's so sacred in Zoroastrianism. They have it on a stand with the horns, the Taurus horns,
Beautiful.
are the moon symbology. And that's the sacred whip, the whisk. So we can either whip spirits with it to spin like a top or a Dionysic or the voodoo stuff I've been showing you. Our flagellation or the BDSM or for Jesus or in the
so much flagellation everywhere. Whipping is such a common trope in so many mystery cults, right?
Oh yeah, and even King Tut has his whip, his flail, to collect the incense for the goat stuff, the temple incense that's used in the Torah. Here in the Homa ceremonies, it's the same way in the Eleusinian rituals. You have to whip up some kind of dish that's dealing with the ancient gods or ancient ingredients, depending on which way you look at it. And so part of it, if we were going to do it in the Greek context, we might use the harmala twigs at that, which is another one, because you can have ephedra or harmala, which is the Syrian root. You could do willow branches. They would use a lot was willow branches, and willow branches is salicylic acid, like aspirin, and it combines with other things. They use apple branches, so you can mix up different branches and impart different medicinal flavors into your cream, your gala, your what we're making. And so go to the next pick. And so and what would have happened there? One of the pictures is missing. is it would have made a cream.
Oh, sorry.
And our whipped cream. And I'll explain to people what cream is. There it is. Go right there.
Yeah.
There it is. Oh, cream. Can you read what that is?
It says crème, from Old French crème, chresma, Latin charisma or chrisma, ointment, from Ancient Greek chrisma, meaning unguent.
Those are the chrisma oils. Remember, we've been talking about the anointing oils, and to be Christed is to be creamed. It's a cream. In modern times, we call it a cream, but it's a chrism. It's that anointing oil that they use in those weird ceremonies that we talked about. It's also,
which they would be infusing with all the drugs.
yeah. And you talked about to be mesh is to be anointed. When they anointed the feet with the crocodile oils or different types of unguents. And people talk about that as to be chrismed. When they say you're to be Christed or you should be creamed. In this case, it's a psychedelic dessert that we're baking. And we've only made the first part of the dessert. Now we're at our cream, our chrism, our gala, our ovum, our Phanes base, because it's going to be custard, and we're going to whip it at the same time to impart that special energy, to aerate it, to separate it, to build the Milky Way galaxy, and build a delight. So go back one pick. So next, we're going to have to put some fruit into it. And in the olden times, we would have preserved fruit. There's multiple ways to do it. You could do a macedon. You could do a coulis. You could do, we're going to talk about different ways, a marmalata, jams. But a jam or marmalata, marmalade, would be the practical way in ancient times to render down a fruit so you can keep it, preserve it like a jam. Preserving is part of it, because preserving is what you do in a coffin to preserve foods. And so you're preserving the fruit essence. And so we can make one type, which is a French name for Macedonia. It's called a macedon or macedon. It means a bunch of fruits together, because Macedonia was a mix of tribes, of different tribes coming together. And somehow the word made it into fine cuisine as well.
Yeah, Alexander the Great is famous for that, for mixing groups up, right? So that's interesting.
Oh yeah, and and we would probably start with some honey, a psychoactive honey at that. Because you could just, if you want some psychoactive honey, take your beehive and put it next to a number of plants, and let the bees. Heather is one. The rhododendron is another one. You can put it next to anything, and if it likes it, it'll eat it, and it could taste like tansy. It could taste like oregano. Taste like whatever they like.
Right.
They like basil. They like oregano. They like different things. And so hit the next pick. So all right, here's another thing we can make, which is called a langue satura. Because we talked about satire, because our friend's going to be joining us a little later in the show, is into satire, which is a dish as well. Not only is it a dish that you eat, but it's the dish itself that people hold. We've been talking about these charger plates, which is
right, where you present the food on. Yeah, it's a shield for banging music, but you present things on, usually a sacrifice, like famously the head of St. John you showed us.
Yeah,
or others.
And so now the word, people debate what the word satura means. Is it in the satire, like satyr, Saturn energy that we've been talking about in the different episodes, or does it mean to be saturated? Because it's a plate that's saturated with the many different types of things, different types of fruits. In some cases, it would mean a plate of a lot of fruits. It depends. So we're going to mix it, like I said, with honey, and we could boil it down with some spiced wine.
Yeah, the key to understand the satura plates is it was a mixed plate. It had a bunch of mixes of things, right? And there was an esoteric idea connected to Saturn with this idea of mixing, because Saturn in the mythology is the one who divides, he cuts, he's that divisionary force of time, right? He castrates his father Uranus, right? He consumes his children. Anyway, it's this idea of this reaping, this cutting, and this mixing. And again, right, Saturn is also the harvest. So you're harvesting these fruits and you're putting them on the plate to be consumed. Deeply Saturnian, right?
And these terms have somehow made it into the culinary world, because I'm pulling this stuff from these. We're talking, the past couple of episodes, we've been talking about these ancient cookbooks or old cookbooks, and that's where I'm finding these esoteric metaphysical terms.
Beautiful.
And once again, they might have, like I said, they're going to use spiced wines. Because wine is a way to ferment and process other herbs into it. So you could take all your psychoactives. It could be scopolines, poppies, cannabis, whatever you want to put in there, mushrooms. And over time, it'll ferment with the alcohol into the wine. And they'll use that to cook down and reduce in cooking. And like if you ordered wine back in the day, they'd actually ask you what kind of herbs did you want in it, and is it watered down? Because all wine used to be watered down. They would never just give you straight wine. It was more like I don't know, what do you call it? Not an extract, but a concentrate, let's say.
Yeah, wines were a lot more higher in alcohol back then and were designed to last a lot longer, right? So
let's hit the next pick. All right, so right there, that's part of the wine stuff. That's what the Dionysian ceremonies, wine was the backbone. So you could take all those fruits and boil it down to the wine, and that would be your jam or your jelly. And with your herbs and psychoactives, and then now you could consume this mystery rite in a dessert. Why shouldn't it taste good? Why? Who says it has to taste bad? This is Epicurean at that. And we're gonna talk about the main fruits that they would have used in a Greek context. That's what we're talking about today a little bit, because Greek yogurt seems to be a famous thing right now at the store. And so this is kind of that process. Hit the next pick. Boom. So Aphrodite. People know her for a lot of different reasons. We talk about her in different episodes. Here it's the quince. You know what that is?
Yeah, it's a type of fruit. Yeah,
the apple. And it's dedicated to her. It's the apple from Cydonia. And supposedly that's the apple from Garden of Eden in some stories. Or this is the one that Heracles was trying to get for some reasons, is a quince apple. And it's from Cydonia, but Chthoniya, Marmolata Chthoni. It's a chthonic marmalade that we'd be making with it, because it has medicinal properties. And mind you, Aphrodite is the goddess of sea foam, because we're making foam when you're whipping the cream. But now we're talking about the fruit that we're adding to the cream. And so quince would have been one of the main ingredients they used back in the day, because of its allusions to the goddess Aphrodite. You can see there's a statue of her holding it right there. Go to the next pick. All right, we're going to talk about another fruit that would have been in there, which is the black mulberries. Black mulberries, very special at that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's a story, and this is a famous painting right here, which is Thisbe. This is the origins of the Romeo and Juliet story, which goes into Midsummer's Night as well. And it goes, this is from Ovid's Metamorphosis, talks about this. They're having some Bacchic ceremonies there at this spot where she lives. And this is in Babylon, it's supposed to take place. She has her lover, and they want to hook up. And they want to run away and hook up. So they're like, let's meet at a spot. And so he gets there first, sees a lion, runs off, but he leaves his robe, which gets torn and messed up somehow with blood on it as he's walking away, scrapes himself. And so she comes later, the lion takes off. She comes later, it sees the cloth that is dead, and she kills herself. And then he comes later and kills himself. And the staining of the blood, I just said it opposite. Actually, it would have been that she went first, left her shawl. He comes later, thinks that she's dead because she sees it. He kills himself. She comes later and then kills herself with the same sword. And that blood that spatters on the white mulberries becomes the black mulberries. in mythology.
Okay, hold on one second though. Doesn't that sound eerily similar to Romeo and Juliet? If you transform this dagger into poison?
Yeah, yeah, that's what it's about. That's what it's and a shroud and a shawl at that. And so these mulberries, though, black mulberries, they're psychoactive. They're hallucinogenic. You could type in black mulberries hallucinogenic, and it'll warn you, yeah, don't take these. Because if you take them, you're a moron. Go to the next pic. Yeah, that the word moron, ancient Greek.
Oh God, you were just joking. Oh my God.
Yeah. For moral, black. Yes, these blackberries. And you could cook it up in the Foole. The Foole or the moron, whatever you want to call it, and it's hallucinogenic at that. Mixed with these other things we're talking about, the gala and the cream and the ovum with the custards, and it'll be very good. It can be psychoactive at that, you know. And the next thing you want to do with it is very important. You want to fold it together. And go to the next pic. All right. We're going to talk about folding later, what that means, because we talked about whipping. We're going to have to talk about folding as well, which is a term. So you can make a parfait, you can make a panna cotta, you can make a fool. Here, this is ambrosia. Here, you would just take the fruit and throw it into that cream and whip it together like a kykeon motion. And you get ambrosia, the amari, the food of the gods. Because they lived off ambrosia and nectar. They like nectar too. They like sweet things. That's what the gods lived off of. You know, and if you want to dress it up, you know, you could sprinkle or baptize it with the rose water they're into. And dressing it, which means to dress something, is putting that green leaf on there. The mint, pennyroyal, is the mint that they would put.
Oh, pennyroyal? That's dangerous, man.
No, that's what they put in their drinks. They liked it. I'm not telling people do it. By the way, don't do any of this stuff. Do not take this stuff. If you take this, you're a fool. You're a moron. We're not telling you. I'm just telling you the mystery rite, what they'd be doing with this ambrosia stuff. You know? So go to the next pic. So this is a symbol we talk about in a lot of these episodes. This broken circle, the horseshoe, has lots of meanings. You could watch all the different episodes and check it out. But this is a fold. So we talked about folding. A fold, it's a short form for a sheepfold. It's a pen for holding sheep, and it also refers to Christian congregations. A fold. It's a metaphor for Christians as sheep being guarded and cared for by the shepherd.
Yeah, you're in the fold.
You're in the fold. That's right. You got to be in the fold. You got to take this. Now we're going to get more into the fold, what it means. Because we talked about the concept of Jesus as the ninth gate, walking through the ninth gate, and Jesus as the ninth gate himself in different past episodes. But go to the next pic. So, we're going to talk about John 10:7. And since John, a lot of John is just alchemical codes, culinary codes, different things. There's one saying he has in there. And it says, Amen, Amen, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are kleptos and lestai, which is robbers and pirates, but not did hear them, the sheep. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out, and pasture they will find. That's in the English version. Now, if you just put some of the Greek words and replace them at certain points, like I am the gate, which is I am the thyros. Remember we talked about the thyrsus in the past episode as being the thing you whip them with, you dip it in honey and whip people in the Bacchic ceremony.
It's also the lanterns that they would use when you see the gods with their lights, their torches. Those are thyrsuses often. Yeah.
Well, Athera is the door. It says in here the gate. And this is a form of it called the Theros, which is a shield. That's a square shield that they used to have. Because we talk about shields as the charger plate, or the flying shields of missiles.
And the drum.
And this is the shield as the door, the gate. They would just use the shield as the door and tie it with the rope. And then Jesus is the shield, the gate. Jesus has a charger plate or a shield. So, and then if we go to the couple words, it would have been kleptos and leste. It says in there, and what he says, all have come before me are leste. It's the people, the people that came before him are pirates like him, but the sheep wouldn't listen to him. That's why he came to, like, his other pirates were and the sheep weren't responding. And so here's the thing. Go to the next pic. What were the sheep? If you go to the Septuagint, they're called probata. And it also means a sacrificial animal are things that are conclusively established or proved. The opposite of allegata, an allegation. Probata is just the truth. Like a probate, when a person dies and you got to go, it deals with something of a dead person, proving it's true, like their will. So when you're in that little gate that he puts you in, or that fold, and he's the gatekeeper, the thera, the thyrsus, you're probata. You're a sacrifice. Guess what? You're under probation.
Right.
You know,
you're going to be the chosen scapegoat, right? Remember, they only ever choose one, and the others get to go free. So
yeah, so if you're in the little congregation congregating at like the sheep, you're under probation as a sacrifice. And the shield is what's holding you in, the charger plate. And furthermore, he says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Go to the next picture. So saved, the word he uses, sothestai. I obviously I'm not pronouncing it right, from sozo. To mean that a woman will be kept healthy and safe while giving birth. It deals with the childbearing thing. So to be saved, it means dealing with childbirth, to deliver, to save, and to preserve. Like preserving the coffin, the dish, a pie, preserving dead things, to save things for later. That's what preserving is. Or delivering a baby. This is women's magic. And there's even 1 Timothy where it talks about saved through childbearing. The woman is saved through giving birth. And this deals with older magic, with Medea and Etruscan magic and all kinds of weird stuff.
It also
we're talking about this one saying right here, and there's even more to go.
It also it makes me think of a lot of these rites we see that continue, like in the Middle East, where they believe, like both Muslims and Jews and some Christians, that there's going to be a full bodily resurrection. So the body has to be preserved within the coffin. This is why, like, Muslims say you have to bury the body right away. It has to go into the ground and be protected by these magical rites, so that when Christ returns, when Jesus returns to bring about Olam Da, or when the Mashiach comes to bring about the world to come, that the dead will physically rise and that their bodies will be reformed, right? This is why a lot of people freak out over the destruction of the body. A lot of more Orthodox Christians and some different Christian groups, like, this is the same reason why Jehovah's Witnesses won't get a blood transfusion or won't get organ donations, because they have to be whole in the body to be bodily resurrected. It's part of the magic, where their body is preserved in the coffin. And it's kind of wild that you're going there from this food angle.
Yeah, well, that's to be saved, is to be preserved. And right. So what he's saying is that if you go through the shield, onto the shield, the charger plate, the probata, the sacrifice, the probated, will be saved, preserved as a dish for a god to eat, but even more to it. Go to the next pic. The word they use to come in and out, he says, what it says, they will come in and out, and pasture they will find. Well, to go in and out, what it means is of men and animals, to go in and out of a house or city, of Satan taking possession of the body of a person, are things of food that enters into an eater's mouth. So when he's saying that the probata who are going to be saved will be able to come in and out, they will come eyes of komine. That means they'll be possessed. If you go through his shield and become under probation, you get possessed by the devil. And more to it is that next it says you will find pasture. No, it says you will find nomen. And what nomen means is that, like a nome in Egypt, the nomes, a nome means name or a judicial district. So in the end, what the sentence is saying is, if you go through the gate, ego emi, I am the gate, is saying, you'll be possessed by the devil through this ancient ritual where you get preserved, and then you'll get your name. That's what it says. You won't find pasture. It says you'll get your name. You'll receive your name of the judicial district. Because that's what a resort is. Like people say a resort is somewhere you go to spend a vacation. A resort is nothing but a judicial district at that, a legal district. But let's go to the next pick.
Oh, wow.
So let's get into these plates a little more real quick because we got our buddy waiting, and I value his time. I appreciate that. So this is that charger plate we've been talking about that holds heat. It holds cold. It's a shield. It's a door for Jesus. It could be Jesus in some aspects. People cook things on it. You could put Medusa's head on it. You could put John the Baptist's head on it. You could do a lot of things with it. So what's on it right there is a bomb top. It's called a dome. It's called a cloche, like a cloth, a cloak. It means it's a cloak. It's a dome. It's a beehive. It's a bell. We talked about bells in the previous episodes. Go to the next picture. So we'll get into a couple movies real quick. Some of these fun little movies. 1971. And the main actress in this one ends up being the lady that's in some of the Argento movies. It was some weird stuff. We'll talk about her later. But what it's about is these gourmands, they want to die through food. Literally through their favorite gourmet dishes. And through sex, as you can see on the cover. So his ultimate fantasy is to die while eating some fancy dish, having sex, and just tap out like that. That's how he wants to go. Le grand bouffe, the big eating, it means. And it was banned in 1971 at that. It came back later. That's why you might not even heard about it.
Never heard of this. It's wild stuff.
And you could see it in the last scene in the movie. It deals with they make bombs that shape, which is a dish. It's an ice cream dish. And it's out of breasts. And the guy has a heart attack. And you can see there's a bomb on her stomach right there, the lady's stomach. That's that thing we're talking about. And we'll get more into what a bomb is. It's like the things we've been talking about, the Foole, but just shaped into levels or layers in that shape. Go to the next pic. And, all right, so that's a big bomb right there. That's Jacqueline Bisset from a movie with George Segal and Robert Morley called Who's Killing the Great Chefs of Europe? One of my favorite movies as a kid, where it was this food critic, or people were dying, the chefs were dying, and it was all based on this critic's favorite meals. And he was going to these fancy restaurants, and the famous chefs were dying after they would cook their famous dishes. You know, in the last scene, that's a bomb. It really has a bomb in it, and they're trying to kill the lady.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I won't tell you who's trying to kill the people, because I ain't going to give away who's killing the great chefs of Europe. Well, in future episodes, we're going to talk about chefs committing suicide, though, and a lot of other weird behind the scenes in the culinary world. But a bomb is basically like an ice cream coffin. You know, it comes from the term bombos, a Greek term, which means like a deep and hollow sound, Latinized to bombus, which means like a buzzing or booming sound, like a beehive. It looks like a beehive. And that was the missing picture I think it had, was an omophalos. Showing
the omphalos.
It's like a beehive at that, and it could be used to predict the future. And it also, the thing about the bomb, it's a boom, B-O-O-M, like a sonic boom. That's what the name also means, like a sonic. You know, we talked about a whip produces a mini sonic boom when you whip it. And if you had the camera that could see, that's the shape it makes in invisible spectrum, the waveform from the sonic boom.
Wow.
What the whip makes, and that's the bomb, which is the Foole. Go to the next pic.
And the lightning, right? And again, it relates back to the omphalos stone, right? With the scepter.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. Boom, right there. So the top right corner is a Foole made into a bomb position on a bomb mold on a charger plate. Gold a lattice leaf around it. So we still have the metal on there to charge it, to give it some electrical current. And it's a whipped cream with gala, with the ovum Phanes egg in it, whipped with the whisk of the barsum or kykeon, mixed with some kind of fruit on there that's preserved with psychoactives and honey psychoactives, with the mint, that's a pennyroyal. these are other pictures we've been talking about. John, they had a John the Baptist on a charger plate, and it could talk, it could fly, it had electrical energy.
Wild.
Yeah. I just wanted to think about that. That the alchemical nature of this food stuff, the culinary world, and the mystery rite.
I just want to connect too. We made this connection, but remind people that the charger plate is also the shield, is also the drum. Okay. And the vibration of the shield, the banging of the shield, and the presentation of the drum with food upon it, these are said to be keys to the mystery. These are passcodes, right? We have a bunch of Christians mock these passcodes. They say, why would the drum be a passcode? And why would it be a plate for food? Now, talking to you and seeing all these connections, how it's not just a drum, it's the shield and the charger plate, and there's all this other stuff. It's not as silly as these Christians want you to believe, But this is a powerful image that's deeply rooted. And this is something like these secrets, right? Were kept secret until the Christians blasphemed them. People died to keep the drum a secret and to keep this charger a secret. And the fact that this grants you entrance to the next life, to ionic life, powerful magic.
Well, if Jesus is the thera, the shield, the head of John the Baptist is the key to open the door. Dionysus.
Gate,
and think of Orpheus's head on the lyre to make it speak, to prophesize. So yeah, where's our boy at?
So let's get our Mandy
Take it to the next level here. Woo! In the studio.
Hey, check. How do I sound? I coming through clear?
Sound amazing.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I didn't bump anything on accident because I don't know how to make all of these wires and things. I know how to cook food, but when it comes to technology and stuff, even when it comes to cooking, I want as little technology involved as possible because I want to be able to control things. I'm one of those control freak wizard magicians that
Before we bombard you with questions, Mandy.
Yeah.
What was your perspective on Dion's presentation? What do you think?
I think my favorite part, I have a lot of favorite parts, and I want to talk about a couple of the things that you talk about and sort of give the practical reasoning for these, because you have the esoteric and then you have the practical reasoning, the reason that people kept these things around and the reason that the esotericism fell to the wayside and we just kind of kept the technique. So the technology, sort of when you're playing with the idea of techne, it gets all sorts of complicated. I don't know Greek yet, so I still don't know how exactly this works. But you have techne, you have practical techniques, and you have technology, and the way that over time technology changes and techniques stay the same, or techniques change because of the technology, right? It's very, very complicated. It's all Greek to me, but as a practical thing, it's really important to recognize that you can develop an esoteric technique and a ritual, and then something about that can then inspire people to take it and to stick, and that's what maintains and stays in time. So you're not super far off, and by any means, when you're putting these pieces over here, you're sort of reconstructing the ritual and putting it back together, right? So it's that Orphic egg that cracked, and you're picking up all the shells, and every once in a while you get a snake scale and you'll put it into the shell, and weird things will happen. But anyway, so I really liked your that etymology of panna cotta. I've never seen that before, because everybody in every book everywhere will tell you it means cooked milk, and I always kind of yeah, it seems too obvious, right? They're chefs are way more clever than just calling something cooked milk. It has something to do with stuff way back in the day, and as a cook and as a magician, as a person that wants to control their environment, you have to recognize that most of these rituals took place and were constructed in a time where you didn't have control of the temperature that your environment. There was no refrigeration, right? So you ask, like, why do these, why is these really thick plates, right, for serving things on? Well, that's because you can put them in a very, very, very cold environment, right? So like way down in a cellar where it's very cold, and bring them up and then put food that you need to keep cold on it, and it'll stay colder longer, right? So these festivals, these rituals, these things can go on for a matter of hours, right? And if you have something that's, meant to be served cold, it can go up to like room temperature. And in that temperature zone, that's when people get sick. That's when bad bacteria and bad bugs and stuff can form on food. And that's when people can get sick. And the ancients knew this. It's sort of like the Christianity that for some reason thought, took all the scientific method that and scientific knowledge that all of these ancients knew, and then threw it in the garbage. And then we had to rediscover it with like pasteurization, and then took it to the extreme because we had the luxury of the Industrial Revolution, where we can invent stuff like refrigeration. But for the most of human history, things that we take for granted did not exist. You couldn't have that experience, so you had to find workarounds, right? So these really, really thick serving platters, they served a practical function. They also served the mystical function. They also had symbology and all of that stuff. So it's kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which side cracked first? Was the snake trying to protect the egg, or was it trying to get in the egg? It's a matter, it's tomato. But yeah, that's sort of, and then it also, and you can flip it, right? So you can have that really, really thick plate maintain heat for a long time. So if you had like a roast on something and you wanted that to be, to stay hotter longer, you didn't have a crock pot, you didn't have a heat lamp, you were dealing with open flames. It's, they didn't have the luxuries that we had. So,
the coffin, right? Because the coffin is the same idea, right? It was invented to protect your food when you threw it into an open fire, right? This is why modern pies, we want to preserve the pastry, but ancient pies, it was about protecting your food from really hot fire because you couldn't control temperature,
Yeah, for sure. So you have to, like, when you're looking at like the mystical part of all of this stuff, you have to understand that there is a practicality to it. There's a reason why these people were doing it, and you have to understand that we, and as people that existing in the time and the place according to the Gregorian calendar and whatever map you choose, right now we have the luxury of refrigeration. We have the luxury of heat anytime we want. We have lamps and all of that stuff. So the layout of people's houses were different because of the technology and things that they had where they had, right? So controlling temperature is like one of the things that all chefs know how to do, right? The definition of cooking is combining ingredients and applying heat, right? And if you don't apply heat, then you're doing something a little bit different. You're doing preserving, you're doing, various things, which are still cooking, but it's not cooking. The cooking is the application and controlling of heat. The preserving and all of that stuff, that's another thing, but it's still culinary and such, right? If you're a person that believes in classifications, the distinction between cooking and non-cooking is the controlling of heat. And that goes for the controlling of low temperatures as well. So if you're doing something that involves ice, that's still cooking, right? Because you're changing the state that your original ingredient is and dropping it. So if you're making like an ice cream, you still cook an ice cream, and sometimes you even cook the ingredients that go into it.
If we're looking at the mystery though, what I'm thinking, like what you're showing me, Dion, and what I'm getting from all of our discussions is that what we're seeing is kind of like the Orphic mystery through this alchemicalization of consumption. And what I mean, like, think about this. Imagine if we were all one monad, if we were that Orphic egg, that one thing that then cracked and then gave birth to everything else. The act of consumption would be this act of eating yourself. And if we look into a lot of this magical ideas, like as above and so below, so much of the magical rites are about reassembling and bringing back that egg back together. So what I'm seeing with a lot of the Foole imagery on this charger plate, you're taking all the elements from that galaxia, from that universe, you're putting them on your plate, you're reassembling your egg, and you're eating it. And by consuming it, you embody the totality of the universe. You reform that Phanes that cracked out of the egg, that cosmic world soul. What do you guys think?
Woo!
So my big thing anytime I'm cooking, anytime I'm working in a restaurant is focusing. Obviously, because I read a lot of vitae, I focus on the waste streams, and I focus on products like trim, right? So if you're peeling veggies, right, like can you do something with that so that doesn't get thrown into the garbage, right? My degree isn't just in culinary arts, it's in sustainability. I got a sustainability degree from a culinary school. So I went through the whole classically trained chef thing, but I have a very particular specialization. And I was literally just talking to somebody in the chat about how, all chefs basically required to have a copy of this. And
Yeah.
I used to have a lot of book tab marks in it, but I marked page 666.
Escoffier for anyone.
It's required reading, but on page 666, he has a lovely recipe for stuffed cabbage. And I think it's brilliant because, we all know the etymology of satire and farce, right? So how that linguistic, it kept through the culinary.
Mixed plate, right?
Can you tell us what a farce is?
So a farce is what it is that you're stuffing into a casing, right? So a farce is the word for like sausage stuffing, right? And a lot of satire jokes being originated from penis jokes, from phallic jokes, right? Satire originated from
songs.
Yeah, so the
phallus songs.
Yeah, the phallic songs where you dance around the phallus, right? And the satirist's job was to basically harass the people that weren't participating and shame them because they lived in a shame culture. So a farce and satire in its Greek culinary term, it has this association with sausages and with stuffing and stuffed meat, right? And then you have the mystery at the festivals where you have the plates, the laxaturna, those plates, those chargers full of all sorts of fruit, and those would have been chilled chargers if they had fruit on them, so that you could keep the fruit cold. Because fruit at room temperature gets moldy and mealy and mushy and kind of gross, right?
Especially if it's cut fruit,
Yeah. And if you're dealing with things like creams and whipped creams, you want to keep those things cold because as they go to room temperature, they would deflate and just turn into a puddle of ooze, right? Unless you fortified your creams with some sort of a stabilizer, like a gelatin or something like that. Which
where to get the gelatin is the hooves.
Pigs, from the hooves.
No, another way was from the sturgeon livers.
Sturgeon liver.
Cool. Yeah, sturgeon liver was a big thing as well back then. Sturgeon liver gelatin, along with the goat hoof or horse hoof, on purpose to gelatinize it, as well as the custard, cooking it. And it's funny because the as well, you said the farce, it's a stuffing. It's like you got to put the fool into the coffin. It's just how it works.
Exactly, and the childish penis humor can't be, the amount of childish penis jokes that you get and that are available to you when you're talking about food. I mean, anybody can take a cucumber and put it in front of them and go, that's just like joke number one. You think of that right away, right? So, this kind of stuff. I mean, we still use eggplants as our emojis for the signifier for penis, like you can't. It's almost like it's human nature to see these things and to associate it with your food. It goes in your mouth and it comes out your butt, but sometimes it can go in your butt and come out. These are all he was just talking about, the gateway is your mouth and it comes, and we were just talking on your show on Friday.
But there's this deep connection here with all of these rites, the consumption, and also the fertility, right? Because we look at the idea of the satire and the phallic songs, the whole point of these songs was to cause, you were basically trying to cause the earth to almost have an orgasm.
Yes.
In order to bring about a new fertilization of the land, right? And so when you bring out the phallus and you're burying it in the ground, it's like this, you are exciting the goddess. And it's this whole play that they were doing during these rites of Demeter, and a lot of the mystery is about this, right? It's about this sex, food, like that guy, like that movie we were just that you were talking about, Dion, that grand buffet. The fact that he wants to die at this moment, it seems to me like in many of these rites, that's kind of what it is. You go through this extravagant expression of the myth and this eating of this extravagant food that is representative of divinity, of that divine person, the Foole. But it's also like at this time it would have been the most fancy food you can imagine, right? It's the ambrosia, right? The cream, the fat, the fruit, that which is served for the gods. So you consume this and then you go through a death. It's kind of wild, right? It's about that experience that's essential to the mystery of Pan, that all you need to have sex and death. You need to have that consumption and that destruction, that birth and that, transformation. All of it has to come.
I'd like to say one thing. You're talking about bearing Shivalingas or bearing these phalluses. Well, from the ovum aspect, balak is a culinary term in the Philippines where they would bury eggs. Baluk. I'm sure you know what that is, Mandy. And you bury the egg so that it goes from a yolk that's hermaphroditic it grows into a small creature. And then they'll unbury it like 2 or 3 weeks in, depending on your preference, huh?
How crunchy you want it.
Yeah, they tap them open and they suck them out. And it's ritualized, but you're talking about the burying of the egg. It does something. It renders Phanes a different way. Because I was talking about rendering Phanes through the fire to make custard. And because the egg goes through different stages, hermaphroditic, and then we have gender, and then we get the creature, and then we get gender. And then so people play on that in different ways as part of the rituals to whether at what aspect of Phanes do you want Phanes at? Male, female, hermaphroditic. And you could render it through fire or render it by burying it in the underworld. You can transform Phanes through the underworld as well.
Yeah.
And here's another thing for gatekeepers with Cerebus. I know you're into Cerebus and the gatekeepers. The other term for it is the thera, like the gate, the theoresos. It also means like a gatekeeper. There's a term for that in Greek, where the gatekeeper it deals with Anubis, Cerebus. Jesus is the gatekeeper for the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
There's this gatekeeping mythology.
And
so the egg can be rendered. Phanes can be rendered different ways.
Yeah, and the chef's hat, the classic chef's hat.
Yeah.
So that is for you get the honor of being able to wear that hat when you can demonstrate that you can cook one egg 100 different ways. So you have that many pleats. The hat itself is supposed to have 100 pleats, and each of those pleats in the hat represents the different ways that you can cook an egg. So
it's so esoteric that it ends up at your modern truck stop diner. If I were to go in there tonight at 2 a.m., I get a lady walking up to me saying, "How you like your eggs, honey?"
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a choice. Phanes a choice.
No, and like that kind of, but what you're getting at though is like, you're right. The egg thing is such a weird culinary thing, because I've worked in some kitchens and this would be a test where they would be like, prepare me.
There it is. That's what we're talking about.
And on the other side, I got this. And on the other side, I got that.
You got the vine. Wow.
That's the Dionysus.
The Thyrsus.
Yeah,
the Thyrsus.
So why do we even need the pictures? We need to strip this man down. He has all the images on his body that we're talking about already. You got some juniper or willow on there?
One second.
Okay, yeah, we could just.
It's a spruce. It's it's kind of it's a nondescript tree. It's Dionysus. I also have check it out. There's a spider.
Oh,
behind it.
Nice.
There you go.
Yeah, what I was trying to say though is like there's this whole thing about cooking eggs. It's become like cooking a perfect French style omelet. This was a sign that you had a certain level of cooking. And when I was in kitchens, chefs would ask you, cook me up a quick omelet, because this is something that you have to be able to do at the drop of the hat in a couple minutes. And if you can't get it to that perfect consistency, then maybe I need to look at a different chef.
We got questions. Does the omelet have cream, milk, or water?
It depends on your audience. Everything's appropriate. It really depends on the palate of the people that you're trying to please, and not necessarily your own palate. I've made omelets, with everything under the moon. So it's all appropriate. It's all, I embrace chaos magic, so I don't really adhere to any strict rules as to
what is your outcome, desired outcome?
Exactly. What's the desired outcome? What is your, what is the expectation of the people that you're feeding? And then, your job is to satisfy the people that you're feeding, not necessarily satisfy your ego. So, if you're in an environment where people have an expectation to have some sort of cream or some sort of, butter or even a little bit of water to add that fluffiness, then, that's what you're doing. That's why you're in it. If you don't have an audience that wants the French style kind of loose scrambled eggs, that's, they want the American diner, almost green, almost burnt ones. And that's what I'm going to serve. I can do both of those well. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of what is the expectation of my audience.
Yeah. Mandy, you're never Apollonian, right? You're not.
Never.
You like pineapple on pizza. You're not for the rule book of like this is what makes a Napoleon pizza, and anything else is sacrilege. You don't like that.
Hey, we're talking about pizza, then let's get into it. All right, that shield thing I keep talking about. Remember, I showed you the shield with the pizza dome, the beehive, the Amontillado stone on it, the bell. Yeah. That's also a mushroom on there. Remember, that's that shape. That's a mushroom head on there. Okay, that shield. It's how you could cook a pizza. There is a form of cooking pizza on the shield. This is a form of cooking up bread. It's a basic thing. We're out here at the garrison in our legion. We just had a gospel, meaning good news, because we kicked some ass, and they gave us some flour and some salt and whatever. And you're going to make flatbreads on the shield. And then you're going to add some type of protein.
Yeah.
Mandy knows this is ancient cooking.
This is ancient cooking. You're most weapons that were actually used in battle were farm implements. The people who had, weapons that were built for them, those were upper class people, right? They were soldiers. They weren't your average person that's going off and dying in the battlefield.
Most people didn't have swords.
They did. They had, scythes, they had clubs, they had, whatever.
Axes.
Exactly. So you only had a handful of shields to go around, right? So that shield, it wouldn't make any sense for you to make a shield if you're not constantly in battle, right? You have to have that shield have multiple purposes, just like your farm weapons, just like your weapons. Most weapons are evolved farm implements. The shield is also an evolved farm implement, right? You could have this multi-purpose metal plate that you could put over a fire. If it had a little bit of a dip to it, you could put a little oil in there and use that as a cooking surface. You could fill that and make broth. So you have, like a simmering broth, and you have sliced pieces of meat and you dip it in the broth, or veggies, dip it in the broth, right? So you have almost something resembling like a Mongolian hot pot, right? But you could also use this almost as a tandir to sear your bread and stuff. So it has a lot of different purposes. And a lot of people's shields, right? So when they would go into battle, they would have the shield that would be like your door on your oven door. You just take it off your oven door and you walk into battle with it. You can hit somebody with that. You can block, things. It's a practical thing, right? You put a leather strap on your oven door and you walk out with it, right? You have a lid to a pot. You put a leather strap on it and you walk into it. Now you got a shield, right? So you have these multiple uses of your everyday environment because of what was necessary. You didn't have things like refrigeration. So you had to figure out how to utilize everything without having leftovers too, because you can't refrigerate your leftovers and you need them in the morning, right? You had to preserve your leftovers in some way or another, right? So when you have this, these two mirror kind of things where you're controlling heat. You're also preserving things by lowering the temperature or adding salt or adding acid or adding sweetness to them to preserve, right? So cooking isn't always a preservation technique, right? If you're intending to eat it right away, that's, you know, a preparation technique. But there's all sorts of cooking techniques that involve, or preserving techniques that involve cooking, like boiling down bone broth into cubes, and then you dilute those cubes later in the future, right? So
or brining things and salt.
Brining things, yep. Brining things in salt.
Vinegar.
Yeah.
Honey.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So those are preservation, right? And then you can then go and cook, or, you know, sometimes eat raw what it was you preserved. And the preservation techniques, that's when you can really incorporate a lot of like entheogens and incorporate a lot of those things. And there's a lot of lessons that you can really.
Well, that's where a lot of entheogens come out, right? Like
Exactly.
alcohol is produced through
Yes.
preservation.
Right? Yeah. And some of those preservation steps require cooking steps as well. So they require preparation and preservation. They're sort of two cheeks of the same butt. Basically, you're sort of, they have different roles, but you have to kind of recognize that these things are happening simultaneously in anything that you're reading, right? And it's hard. I know I'm rambling because I'm kind of
ramble.
I'm connecting a lot of pieces, and somebody will grasp onto something that I'm saying here. But this use of food as the medium to communicate the mystery, that is such an old technique. Like it's, you know, we still do this to this day, where, you know, kids don't understand the concept of time. Like kids can't count to 5 minutes. They can't count to an hour. You know what I mean? The concept of time doesn't exist for them, but you can repeat a song a certain amount of times. By the time the song is done repeating that many times, the step is done, right? So, you know, we have this now where like you wash your hands singing happy birthday a certain amount of, right? You teach kids that because they can't count. Like they can sing happy birthday, but they can't count, right? You know, that's kind of how some of this everyday women's communication of these mysteries took place, right? And then men got their hands on it, turned it into Apollonian's tendency, and started, you know, writing it down and stuff. And when you start writing it down, you're losing a lot of the practical knowledge of how to actually execute this stuff, right? So, you know, I can read Escoffier all day, but making the recipes and controlling the heat, you know, that's kind of up to me to be able to do. Well, right?
Yeah, we have to look at this. Like, I get what you know, we got to remind ourselves we're dealing with a song-based culture and oral-based culture, and the culture that is going to be doing everything through through group work. Okay, they don't have machines, they don't have outside help. They don't have a professional class. Everything is done through the community coming together and working in tandem as a group. And if you look at any kind of society, even to this day, a lot of this is still maintained in Africa and in parts of Asia, where they will sing these complicated songs that will, as you said, delineate time, but will also get everyone to work in a rhythm. And then the lyrics of the song will often tell you about so much. If you look at a lot of even English traditional songs, you'll see this. They'll tell you when to plant the crops, how long you're supposed to do something. And so every kind of work and job would have one of these songs kind of associated with it, right? And we have to remember that, like, cooking is a communal thing, that the mystery is a communal thing. Everyone is coming together and bringing their part of the harvest to put upon the satura, so that it becomes part of this sacrificial offering. It's not just the animal that is slaughtered, but it is all of the food that goes into these preparations, you know. And many of them, like, we got to remember too, like, a lot of these ritual sites are the earliest sites of human development and civilization. They exist for the creation of these complicated foodstuffs to give as gifts and to facilitate this kind of preservation, right? And oftentimes these sacred sites are around oases or places of water or protection, things that are needed for a community. So they're coming and they're gathering here and they're creating these rituals and these rites in order to, it's like a chicken and an egg situation. What comes first, the religion, the drugs, or the civilization? Or that they all kind of need each other, right? They all kind of work in tandem. You don't have civilization without this group ritual. You don't have civilization without the production of entheogens. People are coming together to create these entheogens, and then complex society is growing out of that production.
I would like to say one thing. Going back to Escoffier, some pros and cons of Escoffier, esoteric nature on it. Okay, dealing with vitae and excess. If we look at Escoffier, his recipes and methodology, it deals with waste, meaning that to create these fabulous multi-course dinners with 50 chefs and all these people doing all this stuff, to cook things that the average person will never eat, only for a few people to enjoy. All this slave labor going into it, an excessive waste, to take a dish and recook it, refine it, add something to it again, and present it in a way that's so artistic for someone's Epicurean pleasure. And it's very wasteful. It's Epicurean, but wasteful. But on the other hand, Escoffier came with a disciplined approach to this. We're going to set up multiple workstations where people do things efficiently. We're going to waste efficiently, if we could say. And when you do your part, you respond to the chef. Yes, chef, you call out. There's a response. Maybe no one's even looking. I just got to hear this response, this singing from my different parts of my musical notes in my instrument calling back to me. And then I have a server, or you got a preparation table, and then an expediter, this person that brings it to people. They dress it and make it look all pretty. And it took 50 people to do that, and 500 plates, and a bunch of resources just for a few people, 8 people at a table, to feel an ultimate pleasure of how you can refine something where you could take the same lobster dish and divide it into 3 different sections: the lobster sauce, the lobster this part of it, the lobster that part of it, then dress it with the lobster dressing, and then boom. It's wasteful if we look at it, because that's the only way it could be produced, is through a nobility, because a tribe wouldn't do that.
No.
They wouldn't waste resources. A family in a village can't do that. It's only because somebody has power and likes pleasure at the same time. You got to have both. You got to have power and want pleasure, and therefore you can consume. But Escoffier did make a kind of not democratic, but he wanted like no more yelling at the chefs. We have a respectable outfit. He added some respect to this servitude, to be a servant to serve.
He transformed it into an Apollonian high art, and with that comes prestige.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, what also comes with that Apollonian is this rigidity, this inability to transform, and this grandiose waste.
Because after that,
you create so little,
Because after that, it all changes. After that, from Escoffier, the chefing world could only go to simplistic. You can't get more refined after that. Chefs had to strip down now. Like, I'm just going to use natural ingredients, less methods. It's more about the flavors. Mandy can explain this all.
Yeah. So who you sound almost exactly like, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but are you familiar with the Socrates on the City of Pigs? Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I was been reading into it lately. A lot of y'all have been posting it in the Discord.
Right. So the Socrates, the City of Pigs. Socrates has this brilliant wisdom where he's basically trying to explain, how you can have simple societies and you can have peace and you can have, all of this, but you have to have a simple diet, right? A simple diet. And Socrates is using a really witty little pun here that you have to kind of dissect, and you have to be of that culture to understand that diet both meant the food that you're taking in as well as your way of life, right? So the word bios, right? So it also meant way of life, right? So you have to have this simple way of life, not just simple food. So he's sort of using this like witty little clever, trick to trick his interlocutor. And his interlocutor says, like simple food, chickpeas for dessert. We're Greeks. We want the sauce. We want that sauce. We want the dipping sauce, right? That's the Greek thing. We want dipping sauce, right? And Socrates goes, well, if you want the dipping sauce, then you're going to have war. You're going to have slavery. You're going to have child marriage. You're going to have, slaves again. You're going to have pirates that you're going to have to deal with. Means you're going to have a naval fleet to protect your pirates and all that. When you could just have chickpeas for dessert and, do the Socrates thing that all, figure out how to get the entheogens in without the sauce. There's other ways to do it without the sauce. Because when he says sauce, it's a metaphor for the entheogens. We need to have these parties be saucy. That's that Greek. We want that sauce. We want that sauce.
If I could say one thing real quick, sauce, etymology, it means to be salted. That's where it comes from, to be salted.
Yeah, and Socrates basically says, like, you can have your sauce and you can eat it too, basically. Like, it doesn't have to be an either or. You can have sauces during the festivals. They happen once a month. You'll be all right. Like, the rest of the time we have chickpeas and stuff for dinner. We have modest diets, which means the way of life, right? And then you have your excess when the excess is like that, when you're channeling that. There's a time to channel that Apollonian stuff, right? Otherwise, it's just going to get out of control, and then it has to be Apollonian on top of Apollonian, where you get wrenches in the gears.
The point is, we exist in a world that's gone out of control, right? And it's kind of, we can look at this world through hindsight, and we can see how the pursuit of flavor largely led to the mass slavery and the industrialization of the world as we understand it. The pursuit of food, right? Food production, whether it was vanilla or spices or fruit, all of this caused so much degradation across the entire globe.
And the prior pursuit to, this industrialized, capitalized pursuit of capitalism, pursuit of flavor that we've been existing in for roughly 500 years, roughly 500 years, you can say that's when it's been happening. Because the spice trade, the Silk Road and stuff was a little bit different because that was the pathways for all the drugs, right? That's where the drugs were coming through, right? And you were who controls the drugs and all of that. And then as the potency of these things, was lowered and their entheogenic properties were diminished because of agricultural production of these things, once it became palatable and you overcame that Dionysian bitter, it became this Apollonian agricultural thing. The Dionysian bitter, the wild, uncultivated, natural bitter thing that, these things can't spawn from, there's wisdom in understanding how people controlled that over time. And it turns out what they were selecting for was the entheogenic properties. And because of the selection for the entheogenic properties of these Dionysian ingredients, it allowed for the Apollonian abundance that we have of agriculture. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And last week on the show you said, back for most of human history, people had these small plots of purple, the ergot purple, instead of these amber waves of grain that we idolize now.
Well, it used to be, right? Like we used to have so much more variety in general because agriculture was localized. So you would have specialized, localized crops that grew in a kind of hybridized harmony with humans. It's not like they're not being selected for, but they're not being selected in a mass industrialized way to ensure, like, I just saw a thing where they've now created a type of apple that will have an orange rind around it so that this apple can grow during the winters in Florida. Like, that's brilliant in its magic, but that's not what these ancients are doing. They're doing something radically different. Like, we talked about this a lot on our stream a couple days ago, was the German purity laws and the purification of grain, and how this was a Christian colonial kind of project where they literally went to war against ergot because ergot is killing people and causing necrosis. And this is like a foundational moment of German Protestant culture, right? And it's kind of like we have to recognize that this kind of Christianization also happened to the food, right?
You know, I would like to say one thing real quick before Mandy takes it over. When you're talking about the spices and slavery and evolution of colonization, imagine the king's breakfast at a certain point in the 1800s. At that table in the morning, being served to him by all these peasants or his butlers and maids and servants. You had tea from someone from India, tobacco from somewhere, sugar cane from somewhere. The average breakfast that he had would require slaves and colonies and outposts around the world just to get that breakfast, to wake up every morning, to get that tobacco and that sugar and that tea in there, the coffee, if you wanted some coffee. All these are from your colonies. These are his breakfast would require slavery taking over the whole world to get that royal breakfast. Don't they even call it like the royal breakfast? You know, I've even seen that stuff. So take it over, man.
Yeah, and you know that stuff is when you build up these systems like that, you're doing it with this Apollonian tendency, which is just you got to think of it as being gears, right? And the more gears you introduce and the more complexity you introduce to the system, you're giving yourself the illusion of like this beautiful fluid thing. But just doing that, you have another thing that needs to be maintained, and the preservation of that system that you built, and then the preservation of the thing that you did to overcome that problem that you overcame, right? When instead of, you know, being embracing the Dionysian tendency of, you know, spontaneous, like, spontaneity, right? That's where the beauty is in the spontaneity, in the diversity, right? So the closer you get to the origination point of anything. So I used the example of apples the other day. You go to Kazakhstan, there's 7,000 varieties of apples over there, right? The likelihood of one of those being an entheogenic apple is very high. Like if you're going to find an entheogenic apple, you're going to find it over there, right? You're not going to find it at the grocery store here because that's an Apollonian apple, right? Does that make any sense? And that's true for any ingredient that you have, right? So if you're looking for entheogenic potatoes, you go to, you know, the place where the potatoes were originally cultivated. If you're looking for entheogenic wines, you go to the place where, you know, the wines were originally cultivated, because any agricultural product is the byproduct of a previous medicinal culture. Right.
So I guess we're going to the Caucasus, guys, right? Because we're looking for that ganj.
You know, what about the flavor of bananas? I know you were talking about the flavor of bananas, you guys.
Yeah, we did mention that. That's one thing, because modern Cavendish banana, which accounts for like 80% of all bananas consumed, you know, tastes nothing like the traditional bananas, and like that banana medicine flavor. Like if you had banana medicine as a kid, that was developed from a banana type that has since gone extinct because it was evolved into Cavendish, and Cavendish exists for that preservation in order to ship it around the world, and so it doesn't go brown, so it can stay green on your shelf, you know.
And you know that previous bananas succumbed to the Apollonian problems that the agricultural tendency causes, right? You know, it's not a sustainably developed crop. It's not a crop that had ecology in mind when it was developed and designed. Slave labor, so you don't have the incentive to actually take care of the things to decrease fungal growth without, the only incentive you had was to not get beaten and to, not be killed. So you were doing whatever the bare minimum was to not have that happen, right? So that's all these people that say that capitalism is so good. It's like, well, it's still not good. It's still Apollonian, right? It's just a different flavor of Apollonian.
It's like I'm into a lot of I'm into foraging and looking and trying to reconnect to the local land that I live in here, and it's kind of just wild when I started to get into this and I recognized how little of the local food that is produced is consumed. No one knows how to do, like, the entire way to produce a lot of this food has been lost, or no one bothers. Like where I live, we have an overabundance of choke cherries and crab apples, and as well as other types of berries like raspberries and blueberries. Those ones, the average person will go out and pick. But the crab apples and the choke cherries, they require a little bit of processing. You can't just eat the choke cherries, because if you eat too many of them, there's the seeds have arsenic in it. But if you process them like the indigenous people used to do, the same thing with the people don't like crab apples because they vary so widely in flavor. But if you process them and you turn them into a fruit leather or into a pemmican or into a jam, all of a sudden, like, and I was reading these texts and I was talking to people here in my community, and like something like the choke cherry would be like a corner staple. They'd eat this every single day. And now the average American doesn't even know what this is. And when they see the berry, they think it's just for the birds. But this was like one of the essential foodstuffs of indigenous people here.
Well, so here's the thing, is that they're not so far off when they say it's for the birds, right?
Yeah.
So if you have something that like a chokeberry, right, that it's in abundance, you see it all over the place, but it's really hard to process and to eventually eat. Take a look at who doesn't have trouble processing that and eventually eating it. The birds. So what you're looking at is an ancient agricultural technique where you put a sacrifice for your food source. You feed your food source so that then you can harvest from them. Does that make sense? So it being for the birds is probably the original intent, right? And then whatever's left over after the birds leave for the winter, then you take that and then you preserve it, right? But you're feeding yourself from the birds that are going, and then you go and you
it's like
set up a trap for a bird.
Cherry. What they used to do here is they would make these pastes, okay, and these semi-preserved pastes, and then they would just add it to everything. This is how you would add your it's like your spice. It's like a sweet spice, basically, that you would throw into your rabbit or your deer, or they put it on everything, and they'd eat it as jerky. It's like what I'm trying to stress is, like, this is something that was like a stable food crop. Like, that's been another stable food crop is we have these orange lilies where you can eat the tubers. They kind of taste like really crunchy potatoes. And this is something that the indigenous people were harvesting by the pounds, by the hundreds of pounds,
If I can say one thing real quick, my friend. You said chokeberries and the apples. Those are the two ingredients that we were talking about in the Foole area. Remember, I was talking about it's the natural berries and the apples, and you had to render them down to get the psychedelic properties out of them and to preserve them. And so you can see in your natural environment, it's already set up for that.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's multiple uses to any individual thing that you encounter, right? Just because somebody told you, oh, we eat this fruit, well, it's that, how did it end up anthropologically, right? You have to think about the history of the life cycle of that fruit. The fruit predates humans by millions of years, right? That was food for the birds before humans ever encountered it, right? Humans, chances are they encountered that fruit a few thousand years ago, right? So they've only been interacting in a way for a few thousand years, and you can sort of take and see the impact that the change in the fruit had and the human interaction had with the fruit. Now, is it a fruit that was easy to cultivate and turn into an agricultural product, right? Did it have an entheogenic property that you were extracting and then had certain any choice that you make in your selection process has byproducts on it, right? That's that vitae, like, really, anybody the reason we stress vitae so much in all of this is because any choice that you make has a butterfly effect down, right? Now we can take a look at that with the luxury of modern technology and being able to see how the genetics changed over thousands and thousands of years. Like I was reading a paper recently about the domestication of rice, and rice has these particular traits in the DNA and the genetics that indicate that it was domesticated and undomesticated and redomesticated and undomesticated at least like I think they like 3 or 4 different times, right? So what that means,
grass, rice,
exactly.
Right?
So what that means, right? What that means is somebody a really long time ago, some group of people a really long time ago interacted with wild grass, cultivated it for some reason, and then abandoned the cultivation of rice. The rice itself rewilded, and then later group of people came in and found that hybrid undomesticated rewilded rice and cultivated that, and then cultivated for a long time, abandoned it, stopped doing agriculture for whatever reason. That rice that was cultivated, abandoned, cultivated, and then abandoned, rewilded. And what we have as modern rice is, third generation down the line of these genetic changes in the original grass, right? And you can it's been proven with rice, because the rice genetics are easy to do that for the complicated reason that rice genetics are easy to understand and other genetics are difficult to understand. But this rewilding and unwilding and you can essentially think of like agriculture as being an unwilding, right? But you can also have wild agriculture. You can have interacting with your environment where you sort of take like, oh, the birds are really attracted to this berry, so I'm going to get rid of anything that can affect this berry because I want to eat the bird, right? If you make that choice 10,000 years, 10,000 years ago, you can have both a really delicious berry and modern chickens, right? Like you want this wild bird and you want to control for that.
Yeah, it's so wild how a lot of this stuff, because like I remember I was looking at avocados, and like avocados originally were consumed by giant sloths, and then they only survived because people were planting them for the fruit. So it's like, it existed for one entire way, and then it evolved and it transformed, and it can't exist without us now, right? There's nothing that pollinates these plants, these trees, and propagates them naturally anymore. And that's so true about so much of life. Like we were talking about over engineering of products too. Like remember we talked about that the bacteria, the Camembert, Lactobacillus camemberti, which was developed in order to create a more uniform cheese, but over the years of inbreeding, it can no longer reproduce. And now that entire style of cheese may go extinct. They're going to have to reformulate and find a new way to make these cheeses, and it won't be as uniform and as perfected as what we were used to.
Yeah, and it'll be one of those flavors that we all talk about, like the...
You're muted, Dion.
Oh, Dion, sorry, I didn't...
I was saying we have good bugs as well as bad bugs. Even in our body, we have good bugs. A whole bunch of bugs, thousands of millions of bugs. That's all we are, as little bugs.
Yeah, all of this stuff it's just so wild. The point that I want to stress is, right, we're all in this state of transformation, and we're in a symbiotic relationship with life, and how we impact it or whether we don't impact it, we're constantly in this ever-going flux. So we're coming up to the 2-hour mark here. So let's wind it down. Do you have any last questions, Dion, for Mandy, or any last things you want to talk about?
Oh, for Mandy, okay. Wow. What's your favorite dish, Mandy?
Oh, I enjoy cooking pork. That's one of my favorite things to cook. I enjoy random weird cuts of pork or weird breeds of pork. That's a thing that I really as far as, I don't really have a dish because that's sort of too Apollonian. You know what I mean? I like to have if there was, I'll tell you my favorite experience cooking professionally. And it involves pork. Can I tell you that? Does that?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So I was working in Vermont at this tiny hole in the wall farm to table restaurant. And we were sort of a fine dining restaurant that was, you had to have a reservation. You were booked months and months in advance. Right. And we changed our menu every 3 weeks. We had a lot of farmers. it had a complete open backdoor policy. So if you were a farmer coming back from farmer's market and you needed to unload some veggies, you could show up and like the dishwasher had the authority to take a look and cut a check for you and send you on your way. So it was like it's as authentic of a farm to table experience as I could possibly have. We had a snail farm in our basement where we breeded snails we fed them food.
For escargot?
So it was just an experiment. We never served them to the public, but we did it. It's just we had a snail farm in the basement where we fed them, and it was just kind of our pet snails. But it was really, really cool. So anyway, we developed it to the clientele where we had a lot of farmers coming in for special events and stuff. And one farmer had such an outstanding meal that I come to the restaurant in the morning the next day, and I see a 25-pound suckling pig, which is just a little guy, just a little suckling pig, and that was such a compliment coming from a farmer. Like, you have to recognize that, like,
that's ancient. That's not a modern. In modern times, he could have gave you a good Yelp review. He could have gave you a card, gift card. In ancient times, he would bring you his prize livestock. Exactly.
So this was a suckling pig that this farmer gifted us and said, thank you for, this beautiful meal that we had. I think he might have like proposed to his wife or something at the meal. It was a very special meal for some reason. I don't remember all the context, but I do remember they gifted us a suckling pig, a 25-pound suckling pig. And we said, well, obviously we're going to break down this pig and use every single ounce of it we did 16 different courses. And we invited 20 people to the dinner. So it was this like, very exclusive thing. And everything from, dessert to soup to appetizers, we used every single ounce of the pig. And that was, it was an honor to, be gifted something like that. Right. And I
gifted it back.
I gifted it back. Right. And
Beautiful.
it was the importance of gift giving can't be overstressed when it comes to talking about human nature and the mysteries and ancient cultures, right? They lived in the nature of gift giving was second nature to them. It was just what they did, right? You had
to be hospitable to the stranger, right? That's one of the central commandments.
Exactly.
And the Scoffier is the banquet, the art of the banquet. The banquet is the Last Supper down in the catacombs. It's the Merazov feast. It's the Dionysic feast, the Eleusinian feast. The Homa ceremony is a dinner party. It's a party.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something so magical about food. Like one of my most memorable food moments was I went to the Golden Temple in Amritsar in India, and the Sikhs there, they perform this rite called the langar, which is the largest meal served to the public in the world. They do it like 3 times a day, and everyone sits on the ground and everyone gets a bowl of rice and dal, and you all eat together. And then there's a whole system of volunteers that prepares the meal and cleans. And I was only there for a day, but when I went there, they even were like chatting me up, and they're like, we'll give you free tours if you want to stay. We have a hotel for guests. Like, the most welcoming place I had been in all of India was Amritsar. And it was just, have that bowl of simple dal. Nothing has ever tasted better, sitting on the floor with everyone. Just pure magic,
So a lot of the magic is in the set and setting,
Yeah, of course.
You can have an outstanding and mind-blowing experience without entheogens in the proper set and setting if you're in good company and you're kicking around. Some of the best meals I've had were just like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on the playground with my friends. Like I remember those more than I remember, eating Wagyu steak and stuff. I remember you know what I mean? It's just like the nostalgia is one of those things that's individual, right? Everybody has a unique palate. Every single person on the planet has their own individual record of all of the smells that they've smelled, right? I have smelled things that you have never smelled and you have never smelled, and all of the people in the chat right now watching this. It's also true in reverse. You have smelled things that I have never smelled, right? So when it comes to poetry, when it comes to language, when it comes to relating with each other, if we can communicate about, what our homeland smells like, everybody knows what a homeland is. So you have that, that mediating thing where, oh, you're talking about your homeland. I know my
You're
homeland.
getting to that
Let's talk about the
magic.
smell, right?
You're getting to
So you
that
can-
classic magic that food
Exactly.
has, right? Like, what was the secret in that? Remember that movie Ratatouille? What is the secret of the ratatouille? That it can transport that person back to their childhood again,
Exactly.
right? It's this peasant dish, but it's a dish that is magical to that person, And this is something that is, like you're saying, it's so important. And it's also, we need to recognize that so much of cooking is magic and it's marketing, right? Like, like people put all this crazy amount of effort in and they do all this crazy showmanship because they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to create an experience for you. It doesn't necessarily mean the food is going to be good. Like, like I'm a vegetarian. So, I was watching this show where Anthony Bourdain was in Lyon and he went to one of these restaurants and they did this dish that Escoffier would do, where it was like an inflated bladder, like a rabbit's bladder, and it takes basically an entire day to prepare this dish, and the amount of skill that goes in. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, I would never eat it. Doesn't even matter if it was the best thing on the planet. It's just like, I would never even eat it. And I'm already checked out. But for someone else, this would be their magical thing. This represents this high culture thing, but it's also so subjective and so personal, like what meant so much to Anthony Bourdain and these other chefs. I'm looking at him like, you all look crazy to me.
So we were coming down to close it out, and I guess I can give a little bit of wisdom about desserts. Do you want to close with a little bit of wisdom about desserts?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so when it comes to dessert, the reason we have desserts at the end of the meal, and not to plug my book, but my book is set up as a 3-course meal. You have your appetizers, your entrees, and your desserts. The desserts are all the aphorisms where the magic happens, right? The reason the magic happens with the desserts is because of physiological thing that chefs are doing to you during a meal, right? Chefs are tricking your body into eating more food and eating more food and eating more food because of the way that the dishes are presented to you, right? And because of the balance that the dishes themselves have, right? So you have a lot of during a course of a meal, there's one thing that is notably absent, right? And that is sweetness. Right? If you're doing it right as a professional chef and you're giving a magical moment, what you are doing is withholding sweetness from your audience, right? So you have your first course is very heavy in acid, it's very heavy in bitterness, it's very heavy in salt, it's very heavy in umami. It's not going, or it's going to be heavy in one of those things and lacking all of the other ones. But what is going to be noticeably absent is sweetness, because what sweetness does is tells your body it's time to stop eating.
Go to sleep.
It's satisfaction, right? So if you have this multi-course banquet and people are eating salty food and they're eating bitter food, they're eating like, imagine just eating salt and vinegar chips for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and having like mushrooms or meat. I know you're vegetarian, so having a lot of like mushrooms, a lot of tomatoes, having like this really umami, salty, acidic, bitter, experience. And then you get sweetness. You're given the good, right? That's what I've been withholding. And then, that's my offering to you to get out of here because you're fully satisfied now. Your body is telling you to shut off. Now, if a chef screws up for whatever reason and starts inserting sweetness into the meal, what you're doing is at the individual dish, you're telling your customer, yet your body's telling them to shut off. And then they have to wait that period between the next dish. Their body's already shut off, right? Instead of leaving them with a certain lack that then gets into the next course. It's sort of like a really amazing album that you can listen to start to finish that has transitions and then closes with just like a beautiful like moment, right? That's what the dessert is meant to be, right? And the physiological thing that chefs and all chefs know, this is all chef's secret. I'm giving away the magic right now. When you go to culinary school and you pay $100,000 to work in the best kitchens in the world, have a little piece of paper that says, I went to culinary school. What they're teaching you is that you're withholding sweetness from your customer, right? And knowing that wisdom and knowing that, that's true about the human experience, you can then take a look at these mysteries, because they're having a different, the chefs, the people preparing these festivals, they have a different intention when if they're not necessarily withholding sweetness, because they're infusing entheogens into, the sweet dishes, right? So the sweetness is incorporated through the meal periodically, because that's
what
where
about something like you also see one of the more famous things, and I think this also is kind of a magic kind of mystery, is like in haute cuisine you have the amuse-bouche, the idea that the chef creates their entire course in a single bite. Yes. And then that is supposed to be everything combined into one magical transformative bite that gives you the totality of the experience intended, and to me, like, that's almost what we're talking about with these length Satire plates. You're getting the mixing, the totality, you're getting that pan experience, the bitter and the entheogenic and the poison with the sweet and the cream. It's an amuse-bouche all put forward to you on a charger plate, right?
Satire is the amuse-bouche of the mystery. Satire gives you a little bit of everything, and if you don't have the gnosis to distinguish all of those ingredients that's in that amuse-bouche, take the ride for the rest of the time, because I have complete control.
You're gonna get if you can't taste everything, you're gonna get sealed in the coffin.
Good luck.
For tomatoes.
Good luck. It's like I have, all chefs are shamans, right? When all chefs are shamans, chefing, comes from this shamanistic tendency, and it's become this Apollonian thing over time as the Apollonian tendency took over, right? And now we have restaurants, and you can just go to fast food and whatever, and you take a look at the amount of sweetness that's in your average meal, right? There's actually not a lot going on. So fast food restaurants are using these time-honored shamanistic tricks of embracing the Dionysian bitter. What they're doing is using a lot of salt and a lot of
cheese, fat,
exactly,
sugar, things that are addictive, right?
Exactly, because the sugar is addictive, right? So once you get them addicted to the sweetness, you can cover up a lot of the Dionysian bitterness, right? And once you completely lose sight to the fact that the sweetness was to kind of cover up the Dionysian bitterness, you only have an Apollonian illusion covering up an Apollonian illusion that we call health, right? We don't have the same concept of diet that we used to, but all of this stuff that we're talking about, the Greeks, had that concept of diet, and it was the word bios, which meant way of life, right? You could have a simple way of life, a Dionysian simple way of life, where you're embracing the spontaneity, or you can have an Apollonian way of life where you have to have all of these, nonsensical things that, are mistakes for mistakes.
This is where we'll end it, I think. Do you wash your vegetables, or do you work for the king, Mandy?
If you wash your vegetables in the river, you wouldn't have to pay money to Dionysus.
There you go.
Right. Any final words, Dion?
I'll tell you a little quick thing that deals with both of your guys' final words about your favorite meal you had in India, a free meal, and talking about sweetness. I used to go to the Krishna temple on Sundays and get a free feast for Krishna, and you sit down and you come through and they give you some free food. I get sick a couple weekends in a row after a long time. I noticed something, so I stopped going. During the middle of the week, I went there because the food was different. It was a different meal. And I saw the chef in the back of the Krishna temple. And I said, I talked to him. I go, "Hey, chef, what's up? How come the food on the weekend is so sweet?" And he goes, "Oh, my friend, I make it sweet for Krishna. We make it extra sweet to prasad." And that's called prasad.
Yeah.
And so I figured it out. So that's the moral of the story. I get it. It gave me a stomach ache, but it pleased the gods. So I'll leave it with that.
I love that. And if there's a Krishna temple, like a Hare Krishna temple near you, they almost always have a free buffet or a pay what you can buffet. Take advantage of that. You'll get some incredible vegetarian and maybe even good vegan grub. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back again with part 6 of the Epicurean mystery next week. Make sure you support our dear friend Mandy. They just released a new book with their brother, Towel of Minerva, Volume 2. You can pick it up at their website for $3 or get yourself a paperback from Amazon. It's a phenomenal read, a lot of fun. I'm included in the friends section. Our buddy Nathan, who's in the chat, is also in the friends section. Lots of great stuff. You get all of Mandy's crazy silliness distilled into one magical text. So much fun. All right, everyone. Peace and love. Hail Satan. We'll
Hail
see you
Satan.
next time.
Lucifer.